Welcome to Unity Now, the podcast where we discuss unity, stemming from the Unity 2020 plan, with one goal in mind: bring unity to America and end the Republican-Democrat duopoly. This podcast is created, produced, hosted, recorded, edited, and publicized by a wonderful team of Unity volunteers that came together from all over the country to collaborate in a remote environment. To provide a brief introduction of Unity, we offer this. Unity 2020 is a proposal put forward by Bret Weinstein, first announced on the Joe Rogan Experience in mid-June. From there, the movement was born, and since then, tens of thousands of volunteers have signed up, organized, and have begun to create a groundswell of support. The plan has always included a failsafe so that we would not be an election spoiler, that we would drop out of the 2020 election if it was determined that there's no viable path to the White House. And sadly, we did have to enforce that failsafe recently. However, we believe that unity continues to be the number one antidote for what ails the country right now, and so we're pressing on with a renewed spirit. To learn more and to become a volunteer, visit articlesofunity.org and check out Bret Weinstein's YouTube page and the Articles of Unity YouTube page for the weekly campfires. If you're listening via podcast, make sure to subscribe and rate and review us. That goes a long way in our popularity or searchability. And if you're checking us out on YouTube, whether it's a clip or the full episode, please make sure to subscribe, like, hit the notification bell, all that good stuff. I'm Zach Rhoads, and this week I continue my conversation with Dr. Michael Shermer. In this episode, he gives me his hot take on Unity 2020 and what he thinks of movements like it. What's to like about the movement? What are its limitations? And I do need to make a correction before I take you to that episode. I did my very best to give a 10,000-foot view of the Unity 2020 proposal in the heat of the moment, and what I meant to say to him is that the idea behind Unity is to alter the election process while still preserving and honoring the Constitution. And I think that's fair enough. I mean, that might be a clumsy way to describe this whole movement, but close enough for jazz. But that's not what I said. What I said instead was that the idea behind Unity 2020 is to, quote, sort of amend the Constitution while still preserving and honoring it. So, of course, the first thing out of Shermer's mouth, who can blame him, is, yeah, well, it's kind of tough to amend the Constitution. And so with that slip, I let the conversation happen for a little while, and you'll notice that the conversation does sort of course correct on its own. So I never interrupted or stopped the conversation to correct him. It worked out okay, even if it was a little clunky. We as a team decided not to edit anything from this conversation or any conversation if that edit might change its meaning. So just get ready. My confusing depiction, which happens briefly, of the Unity movement happens at the top of the interview, and it all works out fine. I just want whoever's listening to know for sure that the Unity 2020 proposal had nothing to do with amending the Constitution. The only thing we, as a group, want to amend, in the colloquial sense of the term, is the bizarre reality television-style process that we currently use to select presidential candidates. But I digress. No further preamble from me. Please enjoy part 2 of my discussion with the skeptic, Dr. Michael Shermer.
So I like that idea, and of course there's lots of ideas like that that political scientists come up with. Implementing them is the hard part.
Right.
You know, you've seen just, this what Bret's describing would require an amendment to the Constitution, and therefore you need 2/3 of the states, very difficult to get, and so forth. And you've seen how difficult it is, even with something relatively simple like the Electoral College, say by comparison, and how next to impossible it is to even get a conversation going about changing that. Or more recently, bringing in 2 more states, Puerto Rico and what's the District of Columbia, make them an actual state where they'd have 2 senators. Yeah. And of course, whoever thinks that they're going to more likely lose an election if you introduce that, they're going to be against it just automatically. So the Republicans are going to be against adding states because that's going to add senators and representatives that are more likely to be Democratic and so forth. I don't know. If there's one thing I'm discouraged about, it's how difficult it is to make change of any kind of substantive level of the Constitution, just because, not because people are irrational, it's just because people are so tribal. Mm-hmm. And, even something, like abortion, oh boy, it's still controversial, after 1973, Roe v. Wade. That's a long time ago, but it's like as if it was yesterday. It still is a national conversation. So, and it's still Republicans are trying to pack the court. They're accusing Biden of want to pack the court. It's like, this is what you guys have been doing. Both sides want to do that.
Everyone would love to pack the court. Yeah, right.
Yeah, everybody, just be honest about it. So anything that would keep that sort of thing from happening is good. That is, no one gets too much power on either side. So I like that. Brett's an interesting guy. He's smart. I remember when he started talking about was it Plan B or Game B or something like that on Joe Rogan?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, well, okay, what is this? This sounds super interesting. What is this? And but he just could not kind of get it out. And Joe kept pushing him, like, come on, dude, give us an example. What would you do about this or that? Well, this, I don't know. And it's like, okay, well, maybe write it down, publish it.
I think this is it. I think this is a manifestation of that sort of line of philosophy, let's call it. It's one of those things that you don't know if something works in theory, because things that are only theoretical don't work or not work. They just are theories. But in terms of philosophy and politics, so it's more constructive than I think that Joe Rogan talked, because he was trying to say, how do you follow the rules that we've adopted, that we sort of need to follow, the things that are worth democratizing, the ways of life that we're accustomed to living, but follow the rules in a slightly different way, to continue to be creative and open-minded enough to structure things so that they meet the current challenges. I have a sense that most people kind of want to do that if they could be convinced that this could be done in earnest.
Yeah, I wrote an article in my latest book called Governing Mars, about, okay, we're going to go to Mars. Okay, what kind of government are we going to set up? Now, if you have, 8 people or 10 people, 12 people, whatever, just astronauts working for NASA or for SpaceX, that's not too complicated. But, what if it's a permanent colony and then there's, instead of 20, there's 20,000 people or 200,000 people or 2 million or 20 million, 200 million. All of a sudden you have a nation state or whatever, what kind of government? And, I would love to see something like, I don't know if it's Brett's solution, but just try some new experiments. Yeah. Right. I mean, the experiment we have going here, it's almost 250 years now, but that kind of momentum is very difficult to change now. And the structures are so built into the system that it's almost like you need a clean start, which is, of course, what the founders had when they came here, a clean start. Okay. And they came up with, pretty good solutions. And these guys were super smart, but they're not gods. I have some doubts about the Second Amendment and guns because of the problem that's generated there. And the Electoral College, it seems like that could be changed. And a few other things. But so let's just have a clean start in Mars and start over there. And I would like to see maybe even, like 10 different experiments on Mars, 10 different kind of government structures, and see which one works. Now, science fiction authors have played this out. Kim Stanley Robinson, I think is his name, has that Mars trilogy where he has different government structures, something like that. So those are kind of thought experiments that are good, and maybe Brett's good at thought experiments. But again, actually putting it into practice, boots on the ground, so to speak, that's really hard to do. And people have tried to do these things over the decades, or, third-party candidates, and, as you said, well, we don't want to be a spoiler because we know what happens. So, right. Yeah, okay, but then how does a third party get a toehold? If they're just going to take 2 or 3% of the vote, which is all you need to spoil an election, but that's not enough for them to do anything. If you're still a minor party, you still need maybe 10 to 20% for the winning party to say, okay, well, we need you and your supporters in, so we're going to change some of our platform to adopt your ideas. This is what the losing party tries to do, is to get at least some of their points in there. But how do you do that without completely spoiling the election? I don't know.
That I'm not sure. Yeah.
Well, European nations have multiple parties. Like Germany has many parties, but it's structured rather differently than ours. Ours is a duopoly, it seems really difficult to change the way the money flows one direction or the other, and just the gerrymandering, and it's just beyond me how to actually, make the change. It's fun to talk about these things, on podcasts or on Twitter or whatever, but actually doing something, I don't know. That's hard, really hard.
Yeah, it's tough. That's why I think that, I completely commend Brett and everyone who's been working with him to try to put this into something that's practical and real. I think there's some subset of the population who at least believes that, in line with what you said about starting over, okay, what if we could just start anew and start something? Okay, you have to burn it all to the ground first or something like that. I say burn it all to the ground.
Yeah,
maybe it's because I've been watching too much CNN. But, and it says, I think Brett's brother, Eric, this is his statement. Well, nice, you want to burn it to the ground. Have you thought about doing the courtesy act of fixing things first? I think that probably most people don't want to be part of the rubble that would be taken down to be able to start anew. Do you reject those two choices?
Yeah. Of course, the burning it all down to start over it never works, as I mentioned earlier.
Sure.
In other words, violent political change almost never works.
Yeah.
Because again, you can't get enough support. Most people are just not going to sign on to that, even if they accept most of the points of your planks in your platform. But again, it's just too much. Breaking Starbucks windows is just not the way to go for political change. Or on the other side, capturing the Michigan governor and holding her captive to get your political change. It's not going to work. It'll never work. So how to start over when the earth is pretty much all full up and every place is taken. And really, even the UN, they're not keen on countries changing borders. So like when Russia annexed the Crimea, that was a pretty big deal. But that kind of thing used to happen. Before World War II, that used to happen all the time. If you look at political border maps pre-World War II, you just go back every decade and the borders are moving around all over the place. But now, written into international law, is you just don't do that. The borders are pretty much permanent now. And so even changing something like that would be very difficult legally. And, war is illegal. This is why you have to get the UN to sign off on some military action. Well, you don't have to, but you're supposed to. And so, anyway, but in general, I think that's good because because usually when borders are changing, historically, people die. This is usually done violently. That's not good. How to do it peacefully, again, illegally, it's a long nightmare. Even just like I wrote about the 19th Amendment, women's right to vote and so forth. That took, like a century of activism. Just things are speeding up. The civil rights movement happened a little faster than women's right to vote. And the gay rights, same-sex marriage thing happened even faster. But even that, so we're going back, say, 1970s, Stonewall through and just put a pin at 2015 when the U.S. Supreme Court voted to make same-sex marriage the law of the land. End of story. But even that, we're talking about almost 50 years of activism, say from the 50s to 2015, something like that, 60s. So that it happens very slowly.
Does it worry you that something like the Soviet Union and how that dissipated fairly quickly from a historical perspective, it seems like that can happen faster than something can be changed for the better?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that could happen. Although apparently there was a lot going on behind the scenes that we did not know about, economically especially, that was causing, societal breakdown that probably would not happen here. And also we have enough checks and balances in our democracy to prevent a total, savagery and breakdown. Not impossible, though. It has happened elsewhere. And again, Richard Kreitner's book, Break It Up, after I read that, I thought, woo, boy, I guess this really could happen. This just seems impossible, but you never know. Yeah.
Yeah. So when it comes to, you seem like you're in favor of trying to maintain and preserve the stability of the structures that we have in place now, rather than doing something too forwardly to try to shake things up. Do I have the right beam on that, or maybe?
Well,
no?
So the balance here is between. Again, here I'll just give you my notes. Tomorrow night I'm debating Dinesh D'Souza on something like this.
Wow.
This question of what's better for human flourishing: religious conservative values or secular liberal values. And at the French Assembly of 1789, on the eve of revolution calling for change, the delegates who favored conserving the status quo sat on the right side of the chamber, while those who favored change sat on the left. So the terms right and left have stood for conservatism and liberalism ever since. And they're always wrestling with this question: should we preserve the present order or should we change the present order? And so John Stuart Mill, then I quote him saying, a party of order or stability and a party of progress or reform are both necessary elements of a healthy state of a political life. So the original intellectual conservative, was Edmond Burke, who wrote a book on the French Revolution. He supported the American Revolution, but he was against the French Revolution. And the reason was because the French Revolution, they wanted to dismantle all social institutions, government, economic, religion, family, everything. And Burke's argument was that's too much.
Right.
This kind of balance between conserving the status quo and instituting change. And all societies kind of go through that balance. And conservatives, in general, on average, want to conserve social institutions for stability purposes, and liberals want to change them so that more people have more rights and have, more access to the benefits of a civil society and so forth. So things like democracy, the rule of law, free trade and capitalism, the civilizing process of good manners and self-control, and social institutions like marriage, family, religions, and charitable organizations that teach morals and encourage us to do the right thing. This is what Burke was saying, that the American Revolution sustained all those things that are good and then made the changes that were necessary that were bad, that is, taxation without representation and so forth. But clearly, Burke went too far. I mean, it would be unreasonable to argue that moral crusaders should never have called for the abolition of witch hunts, torture, and slavery just because these were long-standing traditions, or that the divine right of kings is the best government there is, therefore we should retain that. No. That most of the moral progress that's happened over the centuries has been from liberal, especially secular liberal reformers, for civil rights, women's rights, gay rights, children's rights, animal rights, safety and workers' rights, social welfare for the elderly, poor, sick, and children, protection of the environment, anti-discrimination laws, and so forth. So here I side on the kind of the liberal end of things, that most of those good things come about from secular liberal movements for change. Now, of course, the problem is those go too far, as we've seen recently with Antifa and Black Lives Matter and, the violent revolution or, violent protests. Peaceful protests can be very effective. And it's good that oppressed minorities voice their opposition to the oppression. That's good. That's how it happens. With gay rights, women's rights, civil rights, and so on. But again, the moment you start breaking Starbucks windows, you're going to lose the momentum from the public.
Right.
Anyway,
right.
I'm kind of rambling on here, but the bigger picture is that Burke outlined, and again, he was a conservative. I'm not, but you can't just burn it all down. No one is smart enough to create a brand new society from scratch, or there's no committee of social engineers that are going to design a perfect society. We've had 10,000 years of experimentation. Let's take what's worked and use that and jettison the stuff that doesn't work. What do you mean by work? I mean the sort of flourishing of more people, kind of a utilitarian argument, the greatest happiness for the greatest number, and that people, it's a natural human right to want to live long, healthy lives, to be, happy, rich, successful, healthy, and so forth. And that, whatever leads to that, so certain institutions that we've tried are better for that, and others are not so good for that. So the rub is how to get rid of the bad ones.
Conservatives will continue to preserve things until they turn into dead wood and float away, and progressives if they're not careful, will run away and go far too far. Yeah, so, again, the Constitution has built into it this kind of stability where if you want to make a big change, you need more than 51%. You need 2/3. That's the whole purpose of that, just so that we're not willy-nilly just changing things because the mob, this is what's called tyranny of the majority. I think it was Monroe or Madison. I think it was Monroe that coined that expression, tyranny of the majority,
which is a pure democracy is not good. We don't have a pure democracy, right? We have a representative democracy or constitutional republic, because you don't want the mob deciding these things, right? You get 51% of the people that say hang all the Jews.
Right.
Oh, okay, no, we don't want that, right? So
the angry mob, by definition, is not thinking critically, right? I mean, like you said, peaceful protesting is, we've thought about this long enough, and this is affecting us enough that we need to be out keeping people aware. But advocacy brings with it a lack, perhaps, of willingness to change one's perspective.
I think that moral suasion, that is making rational arguments, is ultimately the right way to go.
Yeah.
Now, that's not always enough. Sometimes, again, you need the federal troops to go in to desegregate the schools or whatever, because the racist governor is saying, segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. We don't want those blacks in our schools, and then the federal government says, well, too bad, because we're coming down there and you are going to do this. Sometimes that's what it takes, until the old guys die out and the new generation comes of age thinking differently, So again, as I like to say, conservatives today are more socially liberal than liberals were in, say, the 1950s. If you ask a conservative today, I'm going to ask this audience tomorrow night at this church with Dinesh D'Souza, how many of you are worried about interracial marriage? They're going to look at me like, what the hell are you talking about? Who cares? I mean, of course they should be able to marry anybody you want. Right.
Yeah.
But 50 years ago, you would have been against this, totally against this. Right. And so if we just take same-sex marriage as the same kind of question, 10 years ago, most people, conservatives, would have been against it. Heck, even in 2011, Obama and Hillary both, at least publicly, said they opposed same-sex marriage. Maybe in their hearts they didn't believe that, but they thought they at least had to say that to get elected, say something like that. But in any case, my point is that once that change happens, then people get used to it. And then they stop thinking about it in discriminatory ways. Again, it wasn't that long ago that women couldn't vote, just a century ago. I mean, just think about that. America is a great democracy. Well, we weren't even a democracy in 1920 until women could vote, right? And then really not until the the Voting Rights Act in 1964, when Johnson signed that. That then really blacks could vote. Okay, so when do you want to start the clock for when America became a real democracy? 1964, and even now, we're seeing voter suppression attempts and things like that. So, oh boy, so we have ways to go on that.
Are you confident at all that we're not suffering a survivorship bias? That is, are there problems at scale that are tough enough and that will be consequential enough and are happening rapidly enough that our systems of being able to tackle those problems are not sufficient to solve?
Maybe.
So, if you look back at history and say, yeah, there have been big problems, and those have been sorted out by, we have a constitution, and it's done its job for the most part, and we're still fixing things. Yeah. Is it possible that doesn't map on to current problems and the speed at which they become problems?
I don't think so. I think the system works pretty well. Again, the Trump phenomenon is out there. It is unusual. I mean, by comparison, someone like Bush or Romney seem like, conservative statesmen of great respect.
Sure.
By comparison.
I never thought I'd miss Bush.
Yeah, right, exactly. It's still baffling to me that we got Trump instead of, say, Ted Cruz.
Yeah.
I mean, just because, the religious right is so effective at getting the vote out. And Ted Cruz is the real deal. I mean, he really believes this stuff and he lives it. Trump, not so much. He's, not really exactly the moral standards that evangelicals say that they believe in. Okay, so and Ted Cruz is a real politician. He's just not some fringe guy. Or Marco Rubio. How'd we end up with, I don't really know. I mean, people are going to be trying to sort that out for decades, I suppose. Even so, I mean, we didn't end up in a war with North Korea or with Putin. And so, of course, the response to that is, well, because he likes dictators. Well, okay, but we haven't been in a war with anybody. And, we were all complaining about too many troops in other countries and that the military, is too interventionistic. So Trump has been moving in the right direction for those of us concerned about that sort of thing. Okay, that's good. So in other words, the world didn't end. And it's entirely possible it could be chaos between November 3rd and January 20th. Who knows? Probably not. I think we're going to get through this as well. But maybe, I could be blindly optimistic, but who knows?
What's your biggest concern, if there is one?
Well, it would be that. It would be, my biggest concern would be, say, the economic chaos. The markets hate instability. So if, say, we don't have a clear winner by maybe a month after November 3rd, say the first week of December. I forget the date. What's the December 15th, the Electoral College estimate? I forget the exact date. But if we don't have a clear winner by the time the Electoral College is supposed to meet and cast their votes, that could be really disruptive for the economy. Again, I don't think the Constitution is going to be tossed out and entire government is going to be restructured and we're going to end up with something radically different. That's not likely to happen. Much more likely is just total economic chaos, even worse than it's been because of the pandemic. That has me worried.
I think that I'll ask just a couple more questions, and I appreciate your time so far. There seems to be something about Trump where he's the first person to talk about issues that maybe no one else is talking about. Like, and I could be wrong here, but I haven't heard anybody really in the 2016 election, didn't really hear anybody talking about borders or immigration in a real way, in a way that it's not just you can guess what the next few lines are going to be. And Trump had a pretty clear position. I think it was a stupid position on immigration, but he seemed to have a pretty clear one. So I think for all the people yearning for some sort of policy on that, he was able to answer that question. And that sort of was mixed with a theatrical performance. Trump reminds me of like an infomercial that you memorize, and it's sort of like the if it rhymes, it's true kind of kind of idea. And I'm concerned now that there are even more issues that should be talked about in some sort of clear way that aren't being discussed. I think that...
like what?
Talking about racism. I think that talking about racism is one of them. And not just talking about racism, like that racism exists. I think we all know that it exists. But maybe something like I feel that I'm even worried to say right now to you that I read White Fragility.
Oh,
and
okay.
I think that was... It was... I believe that was such a nonsense book. It was sort of like what you said about Tristan Harris, like you need to repent your sins for just being born, or I do. I'm a white male. And that, maybe that's an issue that Biden's not willing to touch.
Yeah.
I think that if you really asked him, having a cocktail with him, he'd tell me he thinks the same thing. Yeah. I don't know, but I would guess so. But I don't think he's able to say it. I think there are things that people aren't able to say. And
this is one of the reasons, one of the many reasons that I think will emerge as why Trump won was he's willing to say things that a lot of people are thinking. And the fact of the matter is we've come a long ways since the bad old 1950 days of segregated gyms and locker rooms and drinking fountains and everything else. That's not the America we live in anymore, but at least a part of the left, say, call it the progressive left rather than traditional liberalism, is basically arguing we are as racist as we've ever been. And the one reason I hate that argument is because it kind of discounts everything the civil rights activists did in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. Basically, you're saying Dr. King's work did nothing? Of course, when I say that to them, they go, oh, no, of course we've made progress. Right, we've made a lot of progress. Pollsters don't even ask anymore, would you move out if a black family moved into your neighborhood? I mean, people would look at you like, what the hell are you talking about? And of course not. So you don't even have to ask anymore, or interracial marriage or whatever. Right, so... that's the kind of progress we've made. I mean, again, we had a black president for 2 terms, and there's a lot of successful blacks in business and industry and lots of professions that used to be completely closed off as they were to Jews before the 1950s. Say, like, Harvard had a quota for the number of Jews that were allowed. We have to, again, let's remember how bad things used to be, how much progress we've made. So when Trump voices that opposition to that argument that we're, as racist as we've ever been, as clumsy as he is at doing it, when he says things like, well, there's fine people on both sides or whatever, and people go, oh my God, their heads explode. He's but there's a lot of conservatives that go, yes, that's right. And he is saying it. And I I'm afraid
it's the closest to truth that they've heard.
Yeah,
right.
That's right. And also, they're afraid to say that at work or amongst their friends or whatever, even though they believe it. So Trump gets a lot of support when he says what a lot of people are thinking. And so again, this kind of anti-racist white fragility movement, most whites are not racists like whites were in the 1950s and so forth. They're just not. And so when they hear these accusations, like you're a racist or institutional racism and so on, and they look in the mirror and go, no, I'm not. And I do not want to listen to that anymore. And here's this guy that's standing up for me. All right. So that's going to be one of several things I think that emerges is why Trump won. People like to hear that. I know lots of I have conservative friends, cycling buddies, whatever. And this is what they tell me all the time. Did you hear what Trump said? He stood up to those assholes who said, I'm a racist. I'm not a racist. And he said it. And they like that, right? So that, that's a problem when the far left goes too far in that front. So anyway.
I've got two more questions for you, and then anything else you might want to discuss. But one is, let's say, with the understanding that you have only heard about it recently, that the Unity 2020, or let's say 2024 or something now, movement scaled large enough that there are three parties, and it's not completely clear which one will win. It's like just as neck and neck as this race is now. It seems like either could win with some sort of voting sway. Would you be interested in a movement like that, or do you think that you don't have to tip your hand too much here, or do you think you would vote for a more traditional party?
Here's what I'd like to see. I'd like to see four.
Yeah.
Right. So libertarians, conservatives, or maybe classical liberals and conservatives, and then Democrats, and then something like a Bernie party, a progressive party, that maybe have Bernie as stand-in for what that represents, or AOC, something like that. Now, it doesn't matter which one I like, but the idea is that four of them, nobody can get too much power or too much persuasive or money to kind of control things. Right. And that would be more like in Germany. So like Angela Merkel has been in power for almost 25 years, I guess now. But she's always having to make compromises because they have the Green Party and the Social Democrats and the Religious Party and so on. They have lots of different parties. No one has too much power, and whoever wins has to bring into the party, into the administration, people from these different parties that represent it to make it work. I think that's what you're talking about here, and I like that idea. And so nobody can take us in a direction that goes too far, too fast.
Right. The different means to the same end, but yeah, that's the idea: is that nobody really takes the reins or can be bought. It's sort of checks in place to make sure that people can't be runaway progressives or runaway conservatives.
Right. But
do you have a sense about?
The Green Party and the Libertarian Party, they never get more than like 1/10 of 1% of the votes. Nothing. So
right.
I really have no idea.
The idea behind it would have to be like, one of the major pieces of pushback that we get is, where's the charisma? Where are the memes that help me remember your platform or what you're saying? Where is, how are you reaching more than just your echo chamber of people who agree that critical thinking is necessary? I mean, how are you reaching the guy who's working on the oil rig in Texas or something?
The Libertarians had that a little bit with Ron Paul. He had a pretty enthusiastic base, and Ralph Nader had a pretty big following with his Green Party. What was his party? I forget what he called it, but
Nader's Green Party.
Yeah. So but even that was like the best these other parties ever did. And I think it was like 1% or something. It was just nothing.
Yeah.
And it's just there's just so much money in the duopoly we have. I just have no idea how to break that, and it's not what I do. So I don't know. I mean, I was thinking about this with watching that. I forget if it was Hulu or Netflix or HBO or whatever. About Mrs. America, about Shafley opposing the Equal Rights Amendment. But they kind of showed the behind the scenes of what it takes to get the ERA passed. Again, how do you get 2/3 of the states? You got to go to every state, all 50 of them. You got to go to every county, all 50 and every 50 of the states, however many counties there are, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of counties, thousands, I guess. And you got to have all these grassroots movements, and then somebody has to keep track of like each of the leaders of each of the grassroots movements and every one of the counties and every one of the states. It's a bureaucratic nightmare to kind of coordinate them all to get the vote, to get that to that 2/3 level, and that is really, really hard to do. Again, for the
entire country is a lot bigger than I think people understand it to be.
It's massive, and the kind of temperament it takes to actually do that. You know, it's one thing for you and me and Brett or whatever to chit chat about it on a podcast, but actually getting out there, you know, boots on the ground and making these things happen. I mean, you got to open an office somewhere, and then you got to have staff that you got to pay. So you got to get money to pay the staff to run the office in all 50 states, and on and on and on. You know, the people that run for political office, you know, my hat's off to them. I just couldn't do it. I mean, it just, you know, the money. Yeah. The money that you end up making as your paycheck is nothing compared to the amount of work you got to do just to get there.
Sure.
So obviously,
it's your life, right?
Yeah, but obviously they have other motives, you know, in terms of what they want to do with their lives or whatever. But anyway, it's just baffling to me.
So we need an Elon Musk of politics.
Yes, right.
And we need someone who's willing to do the equivalent of SpaceX for a presidential run.
But there's no payoff at the end where, you know, you end up with
there's no $1 billion.
Initial public offering, and all of a sudden you're a gazillionaire. That doesn't happen in that world. So maybe this is why we end up with the kind of mediocre politicians that, you know, where's the brightest, smartest, most talented people we have? They're in business or in academia or somewhere where they can actually do something. I don't know. Well, you know, where's the Jeffersons
They're
and
bright
Paynes
enough
and
to know that they
Franklin
can take care. Yeah.
all the geniuses that, you know, the so-called founding fathers, where are they now? Well, they're running companies, or they're doing other things. They're in entertainment or something. Who knows?
So we have plenty of enthusiastic people, plenty of very bright people, but maybe not everyone who has the altogether package to be able to spearhead something.
I mean, even this, you know, 2020, we got Trump and Joe Biden. I mean, really, this is the best we got. 340 million Americans, and these are the two best we got. Oh boy. I like smart people, you know, right? I mean, Obama, he's smart. Clinton was pretty smart. Kennedy, very smart. You know, so that, you know, I like those kind of politicians. There's some research on this that more intelligent politicians are less likely to get us into wars and you know, sort of take us down paths that are, you know, not too healthy for the country.
More intelligent as in
higher
IQ,
just higher
IQ,
higher IQ, right? You know, more well-read. You know, if you look at you know, the recent stuff that's come out about the Cuban Missile Crisis and how Kennedy and Khrushchev kind of navigated that's a really tricky, very complex, you know, kind of abstract reasoning in a meta way. Like, so if I do this, then it's like a chess move. Then he's going to do, what's Khrushchev going to think if we do that? And it's like you got to think 12 moves ahead. You know, that takes somebody who's pretty smart. Kennedy was very smart. You know, I think that's safer. We're less likely to get ourselves in a nuclear war or some crazy military engagement.
So is it a fair reflection now that I've sort of explained the basics of this movement to you and you've responded? I've heard you say the same thing as what other smart, critically thinking-oriented people have said, which is that the principles sound great. You know, if you can get to an end where people who are in power have to rely on other persuasions or other good ideas, or, you know, not just their emotional conclusions, but the problem might be in actually creating the thing.
Yeah.
You know, it's not like people haven't tried, but how do you get it off the ground? Yeah,
well, you got to move beyond Twitter and podcasts. You got to write some op-ed pieces and get them published in the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, somewhere big that reaches a lot of, not just a lot of people, but a lot of influential people. The people that read the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, those are the movers and shakers. And then you got to write a book. Yeah. I mean, a really well-written, articulated, outlined argument for your case. There are people that do this, you know, like Harvard professors in political science write books, you know, about how to change the system. That's at least a start, because then people can read carefully and think about carefully what it is you're arguing. anyway, that's my recommendation, but maybe that's because I'm a baby boomer and I still like print media, and maybe I'm behind the times. Although I'm on social media, I have a podcast, I'm trying to stay up with it all. But I'm kind of old school, I think you write a book, put your theory in a book and at least start there. And from there, maybe you can build a movement. Not impossible, but it's difficult.
All right. Do you have an idea, a guess about who will win this election?
I think Biden will probably win. I do. And I think that things will kind of settle back down and things will be more stable under Joe. I mean, I'm not overwhelmed with him at all. Nobody seems to be. He's pretty mediocre and average. I think it was David Frum that said, the traditional Republican supporter, Joe Biden, he'll do. That's his campaign slogan. He'll do.
Yeah, right.
Okay. That's probably right. To me, politician, I mainly want him to just leave me alone. Just do your job. Just keep the economy stable, the political system stable, the legal system. Just don't do anything too radical, right? Because, that's what's disruptive to normal lives. Us little people, we just want to live our lives and, don't take the country down some crazy pathway that's going to disrupt all of our lives.
Well, good luck tomorrow with Dinesh. I had no idea that you were doing that debate tomorrow, so thank you again for doing this.
Well, it was kind of a last-minute thing. I've debated Dinesh a number of times, and this kind of just came up at the last minute. And this will be the first time I've been on a plane in 11 months.
Oh, wow.
So,
tell me where again?
Yeah. I'm going to Detroit, to this church in Detroit.
Right, that's right.
So I'm getting push notices from the airlines. Don't forget your mask.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah, you probably, that's...
Apparently, I got to wear the mask all day. Oh, boy.
Whew. Well, good luck with that. And you have a new book coming out, and it's
No. So my latest book is Giving the Devil His Due. It's a collection of essays, Cambridge University Press. The central theme is defending free speech and free thought, and I'm a kind of a purist in that regard. But I also have essays on, again, governing Mars and why there's something rather than nothing. It's sort of my kind of typical science and religion type related essays.
And when people look up Skeptic Magazine, is that a sufficient way to find you in a lot?
Yeah. Just go skeptic.com. That's it. And again, we're tackling a pretty sensitive issue here, race. Our cover story, our author, his argument is that race is just a completely loaded and misguided term. Populations, yes, there are population differences in IQ or sports or whatever. People, Americans are obsessed with racial differences of all kinds. But race is too big a category. You say, well, blacks are good at basketball. Which blacks? Track and field. Which black? You can't just say black. It's a meaningless term. The Haitian blacks or West African blacks or blacks from Kenya. Again, populations, is this more scientific way to think about these things. And populations are not, the word is not loaded with politics and history and an ugly history that the word race is. So I think the sooner we jettison and quit talking about race, I mean, to me, again, Dr. King's dream of, judging people by the content of their character, not the color of their skin. We've gone the wrong direction.
Yeah, you want a race not to be so interesting.
Yes, now this is all anybody wants to talk about. It's like, this is the least interesting thing to me. How much melanin you have in your skin is unimportant.
Yeah, well, we'll get that book published one way or another, and when we do, we'll send it your way so you can so you can take it apart.
Yeah,
as
good.
Skeptic.
Sounds good.
Thank you so much for your time today, Michael. I appreciate it.
All right, Zach. You're welcome.
Take care. Before I sign off, I just want to say thank you one more time to Dr. Michael Shermer for talking to us today. And thank you for tuning in. For more conversations and content like this, be sure to subscribe to the podcast wherever you prefer: Apple, Google, Spotify, Stitcher, etc. If you prefer to consume your podcast in video format, then you'll find full episodes and clips on YouTube. Follow the Unity Now podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram by clicking any of the links in the show notes. And be sure to sign up and get involved at articlesofunity.org.